Hey, this is Dan. I just wrapped up a Zoom call with Nick Dunlap discussing AB 1436, and this is the new proposed bill that essentially would allow tenants 15 months to pay back landlords any back rent that they owe them. This is really good insight on what's going on the legislative side. This is stuff we all got to pay attention to being within the multifamily space. I hope you enjoy the video. Thanks so much.
Hey everybody, today is June 12th and we're here again with Nick Dunlap. And Nick's going to be talking about AB 1436. And Nick has been just a great resource on providing legislative updates and breakdown on proposed bills that would affect the multifamily market. So we just want to say, Nick, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So we just saw the e-blast that just came out through the Apartment Association about AB 1436. And if you could just kind of start from the top, what is it and what is the details of it?
Well, you're right. And, AB 1436 is the Chu bill out of San Francisco. Again, just more lunacy. Now, you might remember Chu was also the same author of AB 1482, who brought us statewide rent control bill last year. And this bill would actually make it illegal to evict a resident for the non-payment of rent. So essentially, it's preventing us from, collecting the funds that are necessary to operate our business properties. But it's a continued attack on property rights, but it's under the auspices of this COVID-19 crisis. We're seeing states around the country get back to work. We're seeing California come back to work, and yet our legislature is like hell bent on making this a bigger issue. And it's interesting because we've seen the National Multi-Housing Council data that has shown residents paying rent. They paid in April, paid in May, paid in June. And actually, I think, the most recent data that I saw for June, payment upwards of, 85%, which is not bad considering, we're not even 15th, right? So things are going well, and yet legislators are, trying to make this an issue. And, our concern is that the way this bill, it's a bad bill. It's one that we have to oppose. But it's not even something that lends itself to compromise, considering it basically makes rent optional over about the next 12 to 15 months. Gives a blanket exemption for all unlawful detainer actions, and it prevents you from using a security deposit to offset rental income that hasn't been paid. And I think what's interesting is that we're sort of used to this idea from some of the radical, tenants groups and activists who believe that, all rent is profit. But, to see this actually finding its way into bills in the legislature, that's really concerning, and these are elected officials that, not just tenant advocates, but that we voted for and we put in office as well. And so it's really important for us to keep this in mind, as we go to the polls in November. But first, as we address sort of this issue with AB 1436, this bill was a gut and amend bill, which means that it was originally intended to, do something else. They've now taken it since it's late in the session, and they're trying to push this through. It's likely to be heard in the Senate Judiciary Committee in the next week or so. And so that's where it's really important that you start to reach out to your state senators and let them know that you absolutely need them to oppose this bill, because it's bad for you, it's bad for your industry, and ultimately it's bad for housing and housing providers across the state of California.
Absolutely. So, it's a proposed 15-month rent deferment program.
Yeah.
And then that would start when?
Well, so the idea is that would start basically 90 days after the, within 90 days of this executive order, or for the emergency being lifted, which is, and again, that's all, that's sort of at the governor's discretion as well. And we realize, how much our livelihoods are depending on just what the governor has to say. We hate to make these, issues so political, but clearly, this has become sort of the game of manipulation, and it's not just our economy. Now it's our industry, and it's affecting our livelihood. So it's really important for us to to speak up and speak out against it.
And what other things are important within this bill? That's the first thing that stands out, is just how long that tenants have to pay back
Sure.
rent, but what other things? I know you touched on a few of them, but any other like major?
I think what's really interesting about this and kind of going through, the whole, this, the pandemic and realizing, that, hey, look, there are people who are going to experience financial hardship and will need us as property owners to work with them. I think what was most impressive to me is I got calls from a lot of friends, and family who own rental properties who wanted to know how they could actually help residents out who were having a hard time. And what's interesting is that, one of the more common ways that people considered, hey, a good option for us would be, to apply some of the security deposit to the unpaid rent. And that way residents are able to keep money in their pocket, and I can use this money so that I can pay the mortgage and pay some of the other critical operating or capital expenses that might come up. And, like in the city of Los Angeles, they're prevented from doing that. And so I think that's really concerning as well, because, clearly in a perfect world, that this would not even be an issue, but, it's not a perfect world. It's California, and, we've kind of, we're coming out of this pandemic. And so I think what legislators really need to realize is that, this is not just, there's two sides to that landlord-tenant relationship. And, it's important for them to realize that not all property owners, not all rental property owners are bad people. And rent is not just profit going to the bottom line. I mean, rent, a lot of the rent goes to, obviously, as maintenance expenses, utilities, insurance, and other things. And there's, there are costs to, keep up and maintain your properties that don't stop just because, a resident may or may not pay rent. And so this is absolutely a scary bill. And I think what's interesting about it, and I think why we have to, take this perhaps even more seriously than, AB 828, that was sort of a similar bill, with the rent deferment. This is, I think, more extreme in that it's later in the session. And again, it kind of came out of nowhere. And the fact that it's getting a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee so quickly, I mean, this thing is moving. And so, our hope is that, through an effective advocacy campaign, through calls to legislators, that we'll be able to, to thwart this overreach is, sort of similar to, 828 and also the 929 bill as well.
So I think the biggest question is, it seems like there's odds if this gets passed, I mean, hopefully not, but what's the odds that there is going to be some bill that's going to be passed to structure payback repayment plans?
I'd say it's very likely. I mean, I would think, it didn't happen with 828 and then didn't happen with 929, which was sort of the commercial version, right? But I think now with 1436, if this does not pass, I still believe there will be some sort of emergency order, to force, payment plans or some sort of, unlawful detainer protections above and beyond what are already in place, So I think it'll be interesting.
And most likely no help for landlords, right?
Well, right. I mean, there are a couple bills out there that are targeting, sort of the creation of, I guess of subsidy or tax credits to be issued to, to apartment owners who are actually able to, issue like maybe a rent forbearance or, even rental, the forgiveness of rental payments to residents. But, the likelihood of those passing, considering, the budget shortfall that we're going to have as a result of all of this is pretty unlikely. So I think it's especially troubling that, there's this big push to let, our customers off the hook, but, there's nothing really out there to ease the pressures that we will face as property owners.
Okay, so likely a bill is going to get passed. Hopefully it's not this one, but something similar to it on a repayment plan is going to have to happen. And outside of a bill like this, the next concern would be what the Prop 10 2.0 is. That, I mean, that's still very
well
as well.
Oh, absolutely. So, just about 2.5 weeks, we should find out a little bit more about, what the landscape's going to look like as far as propositions go. It's going to be a busy ballot in November, aside from the presidential election and aside from all of the, down ticket offices that we'll be voting for. We're going to have the AB 5 repeal that will be, that'll be on the ballot. And that's, of course, the the most recent, essentially the Lyft and Uber, DoorDash, bill, if you will, where they've changed how independent contractors are classified, and basically calling independent contractors employees, and then of course that's caused issues for a number of companies out of Silicon Valley. And so AB5 is going to be the big one. Obviously, the split roll bill will be big for commercial real estate. It's left apartments alone this time, but that's likely something to be. I think that's something that'll happen in a future adjustment to the bill or to the legislation. What's really tricky about the split roll bill is if you read it, and I had numerous people tell me that, well, look, this doesn't apply to small businesses. It only applies to big corporations like Amazon and others who don't pay their fair share. And of course, I mean, as somebody who pays property taxes, you realize there's no way to differentiate in a property. I mean, how would you differentiate that something's going to affect only a small business or a large business, or not one or the other? And in reading the bill, what they've done is they've put a cap on the personal property taxes that are paid by businesses. And I think the threshold is like $500,000. And so that's what they're calling, that's what they're calling this exemption for small businesses. So there's absolutely no change to the property taxes. Small businesses will still get hit. And actually, as a result of that, you're a small business owner, you're going to experience a greater impact than perhaps a commercial or a bigger company will from that standpoint. But it's especially troubling because they've put this, part of the bill together that gives you the personal property tax exemption, not a real property tax exemption. And so I think people are really going to need to do their homework. And that's certainly something that we're going to have to educate people on, this whole idea that, personal property applies to the fixtures and other appliances and such that you might have on hand at your place of business. Whereas the real property tax is the building that you own, and that's the bigger dollar amount, right? Of course, last but not least, as it relates to our industry, there's the Weinstein bill, Prop 10 2.0, and that's the Costa-Hawkins repeal. And what's really interesting about this is that it actually would repeal 1482 because it would insert sort of a more stringent and a more strict rent control, similar to like a New York style, where you would, you basically would no longer be able to charge market rates for a vacant apartment. You'd be somewhat handcuffed to the rent the former resident was paying. And so, it was concerning before, it's concerning now. And it's just something that, we've got to continue to fight until we can, hopefully demonstrate to this, Michael Weinstein that, look, the industry is going to unite, and that Californians kind of see past the self-serving, efforts or initiatives of his ballot initiatives, and that we're gonna vote intelligently and defeat these self-serving initiatives. So it's a lot, and it's unfortunate we continue to face these, but that's life in California nowadays.
There's a lot going on. There's a lot to pay attention to. I mean, just within just property management and rent collections, we're all very grateful. It's been somewhat almost like a regular month for April, May, and June, and hopefully it'll carry on. But then now we have to focus on all these new proposed bills, and it's just, we really appreciate the refresher because there's just so much coming at you, and there's so many changes, and it's just a lot. So we appreciate everything you're providing. I think a lot of people on the ownership side are very grateful again about collections, but they're looking at, okay, well, what about, it's always the next month. What about what about June? Okay, well, now it's, what about July, right? June's firmed up, looking like a really good month as well. But then it's just, okay, what about when the stimulus maybe runs out and, their jobs, been some loss there. And what's it going to look like when maybe some of that stimulus burns off, unemployment, and where collection is going to be then. And then I think that concern about the payment plans are going to potentially, but it almost seems like, and we talked about this on a previous video with you, it's almost like encouraging bad behavior.
It is.
Because how do you protect, you've got good collections now, most people are like 95+%
yeah,
collected, and then it just seems like that could turn, a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of the building figure out, oh, it's optional to pay rent. That's
Look, for what it's worth, I mean, obviously we've seen, a lot of the record job losses, temporary job losses as people have been, laid off or have been sort of quarantining, at home. But I think what's really interesting is that, yeah, we've had this just constant media interest in whether or not people were going to pay. And I almost think that I think that really was instrumental in kind of driving some of this behavior, because I think, I talk to friends and peers in the industry, and they're not seeing the request for forbearances, and so it's interesting because you see these large rent strikes getting attention and, by the media, and people saying to cancel rent and cancel all mortgage payments. And I just think that just demonstrates a lack of maturity and a lack of understanding of how, I think the world and business and industry all works, and it's unfortunate that we have to constantly remind our legislators of that, that we have to go to people and say, hey, we have mortgage payments to make. We have utilities to pay. We have insurance expenses to cover, and all of our expenses continue to rise really at a pace that, at a pace that, higher than inflation, that's for sure, just gosh, utilities and insurance alone, two of the bigger expenses, those are growing faster than inflation. And so I think it's really important for our legislators to understand that, and then especially you look at a bill like 828, and, I think what's interesting is that, there was the part of that bill that was especially problematic was that it would have, basically a judge, and this, just to kind of revisit 828, a judge could have said, hey, I'm going to give you a 25% discount in your rent, put you on an automated payment plan. That's going to result in an immediate loss of value of the property. And so what happens if, you go to refinance and, all of a sudden now your rents are 25% lower, it affects the value of the property, serious issues to look at, and these are things that our legislators should be aware of and should understand, because, more of them should come from, I think, a background where they've owned and operated businesses and they know how, the markets work. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, which is why they kind of continue to overreach and continue to punish. And again, I think it's something for us to keep in mind as we go to the ballot boxes in November.
Absolutely. No, totally agree with you. We have seen some really good things happen in the past 90 days. Collections that we just discussed has been very strong and almost like regular, and that's created some confidence within the market, and deals are coming together. We're getting properties closed. There is a market out there, which is good, and things are moving along. Even Chase came back into the market this week and is starting to lend again. They stepped out, now they're coming back in. That's a really big sign and a good step right there. So it's just, there's some really good things happening within the marketplace. So we just want to be optimistic.
Oh yeah.
Certainly on top of all these things, but we got to fight this stuff and continue to keep pushing through.
Exactly. I think what we're seeing and what we've seen recently is that more and more, this political or legislative side of the world we live in is part of doing business. And so just like you said, there's obviously, interest rates are great. Property values, I think have remained steady. Collections are strong. It's a good time to be an apartment owner. And from that standpoint, I think it's still a good time to buy. Obviously, you've got to call Dan Blackwell for the best opportunities in and around Orange County. But, look, all jokes aside, it's a good time to be an apartment owner. And this is just something that we need to, I think, to take into account, is that we have to, make the calls and make sure that we're impressing upon our elected officials, what this means to our industry. One of the things I thought was funny, it's during the whole pandemic, it's people on Facebook are starting these groups where they're going to small restaurants and everybody's going to buy from this restaurant on this day, or everybody's going to shop at this shop on this day. And all that we got was Channel 2, Channel 5, and Channel 9 talking about how people weren't paying rent and, what's going to happen with landlords, right? And so then there's this emergency legislation to, help people, that might not pay rent. And again, I just think it speaks to the whole hysteria. I think that the media helped to drive. It's unfortunate.
Another question, because I'm thinking about just some other things that are happening in the market as far as rent increases are concerned. That's one thing that you're not hearing as much. A lot of people just dropped any substantial renovations to their properties or doing any rent increases to this pandemic. But because things have been pretty stable, we're starting to see some owners raise some rents just very marginally, but especially with rents that are way below the market. And my question is that going to be taken away potentially with?
Well, if the ballot, if the ballot initiative passes, yeah, absolutely it will be. And so I think, I still think as far as like the capital expenditures go and owners continuing to reinvest in their properties, I think you probably never have a better time to do that than now, especially for the long-term owners that may or may not have debt on their properties. If, there's obviously opportunities for them to go out and kind of explore the marketplace to maybe, refinance and use some, maybe take some of that money tax-free, but also take some of that money to go, fix interior units, fix the roof, fix some of the structural and system elements that are going to continue to age over time. Because I think that's the other thing is that, look, let's not lose sight of the big picture here. I mean, in spite of the craziness going on around us, I can't think of a better business to be in than the apartment business, than owning and operating rental housing in and around a supply constrained market like Orange County or Los Angeles. I mean, there's just, there's, in my opinion, no better investment and no better business to be in. And so I just think you got to continue to operate intelligently.
So back to the raising rents. So we can raise rents right now 5% plus CPI, right? Theoretically.
In accordance with the 1482, yes.
Currently. Well,
yes.
The question is, where's CPI? Is that, it was plus or minus 3%. So people were thinking 5% plus 3, call it. But it's, now there's new reports coming out that CPI is going to be a fraction of that. So.
Well, it's right. Yeah, it's very likely. So the last numbers that I saw were, around that like 2.77 figure, I think, something like that, plus 5. And so I think, that's for the time being until the state has published their new figures. That's what we're going to want to, that's what we're going to want to go off of.
Okay. I've heard it even CPI was going to be close to 0, so we'll get some facts and put that out there. But I don't see a lot of people raising rents 5% plus CPI right now, but that has been when investors are looking at modeling a building and looking over, the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, it does.
Yeah. Well, look, so much of that, I think, look, and that's like anything. If you keep your rents up over time, then you don't have those the more significant rent increases, But I think the CPI plus 5 measure was intended by legislators to be the, sort of the opportunity for people who haven't kept up with rents to maybe be able to recuperate a little bit more than the market might bear. But at the same time, it's the fact that I think a lot of those people, you meet, and I'm sure you encounter these people, the longtime owners who haven't increased rents in 10, 12 years. And, they've got people paying $600 for a 1-bedroom apartment that would rent for probably $1,400, somewhere in Orange County. So it's, I think those are unfortunately, and those are the people where I think that's, those were sort of the anecdotal, stories that kind of drove the, like 1482, if you will, it was people, all of a sudden $800, the rent's going up $800 in 90 days. And, so.
Well, we just got to stay optimistic. We got to stay informed too. And that is largely done by you. And these videos are really helpful. We'll provide links below on the previous videos that we've done. And thank you so much, Nick. We really, really appreciate it. And support the local apartment association. Everybody here at Orange County, you guys have been great.
Yes.
And
can I give a shameless plug? AAOC.com. AAOC.com. If you're not a member, please log on, join. You can do it all online. You get access to the best forms, lease agreements and other notices that'll help you navigate, the AB 1482 climate. So it's all there. Great staff, great association. Please join.
Absolutely. I use your forms on our rentals, and it's very helpful. You guys have been great. And thanks for doing this extra step. The audience, the investors within the market need to hear it. So thanks for everything on a real-time basis.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
All right. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.
You got it.
Bye.